We're going straight into the disclaimers with this one. It is a story of domestic homicide, domestic abuse. And although I don't go into full details about the injuries and there's no graphic pictures, I do describe that sort of stuff, so if you're sensitive, you're probably best not listening. And as always, this is a true story. It's a real crime, it happened to real people, and it involved real people. So if you're going to comment and share, which I do want you to do, please do so with a bit of sensitivity. Before we start, let me introduce myself. I'm Hollie, this is All I'm Saying. Here we talk about true crime and we talk about other amazing stories. So please do subscribe, please do share it, please do thumbs up. Let's get on with this absolutely heartbreaking story. Hollie Kerrell was from Kingsbridge, that's in Devon and that's in England. She had 5 sisters and she studied at Kingsbridge Community College. In roughly 2008, at the age of 18-year-old, Hollie moved to Wales. While in Wales in 2010, she met Christopher Kerrell. A short 3 years later, Hollie and Chris got married. I read somewhere that they did move back to Devon together and then back to Wales. I'm not quite sure, and I didn't look into it that much because it's not really important to the story. However, early in 2018, Hollie and Chris and their 3 young children moved to a house in Knuckles, which is in Wales. It's said that Hollie was a warm, kind, outgoing character with lots of friends. She was a loving person and a devoted mom that were never found to be too far away from her children. She was also a keen horsewoman. She absolutely loved horses. She was also part of a unique family, that's unique with a Y-O-U. And that group of people sells cosmetic beauty products online. As well as having lots of friends, she was also very close to her mom and her sister. Her mom were also fond on horses, so they spent a lot of time together with the horses. And they'd ride the horses, they'd look after the horses, just generally spending time with the horses. And they did that together. They had a really good close relationship. As a full-time mom, Hollie was a fashion lover. And when she was pregnant, she started knitting baby clothes and baby blankets and cot blankets and stuff. And this carried on. So when the kids got a little bit older and she had a bit of spare time, she then started selling all these things that she was knitting on a market. In March 2018, just a month before this story takes place, Hollie had also done the Steps Challenge for cancer research in March. And that, if you don't know what that is, it's a set amount of steps. I think it's usually about 10,000, might be 12. And you have to do that many steps that month, and you get sponsorships and donations and stuff, and you raise money by doing that. And at this point, it sounds like a much loving household, a very nice relationship. She was married, she had these kids, all were well. And although Hollie did love her kids very dearly, that's not reality. In fact, it's far from it. Because you see, Hollie's friends had described her and Chris's relationship as very volatile. Hollie had told her mom and her friends that Chris, her husband, was violent towards her. And he'd also had affairs during the marriage. And he did later admit that, saying that I was unfaithful once and the rest of it was sort of flirting messages. So we didn't have to get long into this story before we can already see that things aren't as they should be within this marriage. Hollie had told her friends that she felt trapped and that Chris was jealous and possessive and controlling. He'd even threatened that if she ever left him, he'd kill himself in front of the kids. And at one point, Hollie sent a text message to a friend that read, "He blackmailed me with the kids. I just want out, a new house, a fresh start." However, Hollie knew that she weren't in a good place. She knew that this relationship weren't working. She needed to get out for her sake and for the children's sake. So while she was plotting to leave him, she did text a friend that said, "I'm scared. I don't want to hurt anyone. I know I have to at some point, and I have no idea how he'll react." However, all respect due to Hollie, she had found a way. She'd finally broke off their relationship. And obviously they were still married, but she'd said, "I don't want to be married anymore, you need to leave." And he had left. He was now living at his mum's farm that were about 6 or 9 miles away. However, despite this, living somewhere else and separated, he still visited the house pretty much every single day to see the kids. And at the time, he took to Facebook saying how hard it was to leave the children and how upset he were and all that kind of stuff. And then on the Sunday the 22nd of April 2018, 20-year-old mother of 3 Hollie Kerrell disappeared. However, luckily for Hollie, she still had them really good relationships. She's still very close to her mom and her sister, and she had lots of friends. So it didn't take long before her disappearance was noticed. You see, Hollie was big on social media, and unlike a lot of the people that sell these cosmetics online, they do a lot of the upselling, a lot of the pushing of the products through social media. So Hollie not only had that as a tool for selling things, but she also had a booming social life. I won't say booming, but she had a big social life that she was constantly trying to keep up with. So if that stopped, then it would be quite clear that there was something amiss. And on the morning that Hollie disappeared, she was talking to her sister via text messages. And the last message that Hollie sent simply read, "I'll message in a bit." However, the next morning came, Monday the 23rd of April, and Hollie's sister realised that she still hadn't heard from Hollie since 10 AM the previous morning. She hadn't been on the social media, and as we just said, that's very uncommon for Hollie, and it's very out of character for Hollie. With all things considered, Hollie wasn't taking any chances. She knew this was out of character, she knew something weren't right, so she went straight to the police and reported Hollie as missing. With all the details she told the police, all the reasons that she was so concerned, Detective Anthony Griffiths knew there was something quite not right. This weren't the typical somebody's gone missing case. She'd recently separated from a partner. She had 3 children that she was never too far away from. She had a good, strong relationship with her parents and her friends, and she just disappeared without saying a word. And I'm not quite sure if Hollie's sister mentioned the things about Chris, but obviously if she had, that'd be even more alarm bells. Knowing something didn't feel right, Detective Griffiths pretty much straight away went and set up an incident room. And from there, he started to build a team of detectives to work on the case. When he arrived at the office on Tuesday the 24th of April, the investigation was already in full swing. The team were already working on things, trying to get links. I think even the Monday that they'd already started asking people. I did read it with Door to Door, but there's a documentary that I quickly flicked through for any information that I'd missed, and that suggested that it was like the Monday. So I'm not quite sure, it was either the Monday that it was reported or the Tuesday. However, the investigation did start. The team was being built on that Monday. So it's past 24 hours since she's been missing. Her sister's just told the police, and they're like, we're on it. And I have to give it to the police. Throughout this entire investigation, they are on point. They don't waste a second. It is amazing how efficiently they did this. There was 25 officers on the case on Tuesday, and 2 had gone to speak to Hollie's mom, ask her what she knew, ask her where she might be. They were checking social media, and they were checking cell towers for pings. I talked about this in the Claudia Lawrence missing persons thing, but your phone's constantly pinging out to cell towers, and by that you can geolocate where that phone's been at any given time. So they're getting that information, they're looking on social media, they're just basically starting the investigation, finding any trace possible. And that was the initial tactic, to talk to as many people as possible, find the nearest trace possible. And obviously what we're trying to establish is who was the last person to see Hollie, where was she, what was she doing, how was she, what was her demeanour like. So obviously this also included officers going from door to door on all of Hollie's neighbours. And again, obviously, one of the biggest people we wanted to talk to was her husband Chris. And apparently, during this time, Chris had actually been sending concerted and cynical messages to Hollie's friends and Hollie's family, saying that she'd left him and she'd left the children, she'd taken some clothes with her, and he was trying his best to find her. But Chris, all in all, was living life as normal. He'd visited the shops, he'd gone to the supermarkets, he was talking to friends, he was talking to family on the phone, he was taking the kids to school. Even on the Monday, the day after the mom's gone missing, he took him to school. He was just living life as if absolutely nothing had happened. Furthermore than that, Chris Kerrell was also posting messages on Facebook asking people to help join the search and find Hollie. As the police were doing door-to-door questioning, asking neighbours if they knew anything, asking if they'd seen anything suspicious recently, a picture very quickly got painted that Hollie and Chris's relationship were very volatile and toxic. And when Chris were questioned about this, he never tried to deny it. He never tried to hide that they frequently argued. However, he did put an account for where Hollie was. Although he said he didn't know her exact location, he was trying to find her. He did say that Sunday morning they had an argument, and at which point Hollie left the house and left him with the kids. He also says at that point she took her belongings, meaning stuff like a phone, a purse and a bag of clothes. Before leaving the house, Hollie had told him she'd had enough, he could have the house, he'd be looking after the kids, she just had enough and she was going. But that didn't quite make sense to Hollie's friends and neighbours, because pretty much all of them said, no, Hollie would not leave the children. Hollie loved the children so much she would never ever leave them. Police also found out from the neighbours that the day before she'd gone missing, Chris and Hollie had had a big argument in the middle of the street. And during this argument, Chris had even tried to run over Hollie's phone. They then went inside the house, and the argument continued for some while, with them both screaming and shouting. Police at some point also discovered some text messages that Hollie had sent, and here's what they were. One was, "I'm not allowed out much." Another was, "Beat me up before and is really controlling. Bullied me back to staying with him again. He just checks my phone. He said if I left him he would kill himself. I feel so low. I am seriously wondering if it would be better for me to just disappear." At some point the weekend of Hollie's disappearance, Chris had snapped her car key, and obviously done this to prevent her from using it, to prevent her from going anywhere. And although all this information, all these statements are coming in, and they're making it look like Chris really could have had something to do with this, 3 witnesses came forward, and they basically gave Chris an alibi. They backed up Chris's version of events that had left. And obviously I'm not saying that these people were in on it. I think it was just generally mistakes. They didn't realise that it weren't Hollie, it was someone that looked like Hollie, if you know what I mean, and they just thought they'd seen her, they were trying to be helpful. One witness said they saw Hollie walking down the main road outside of Knuckles, and another one said that they'd seen her on a train. So like I said, both these statements do match up that she was leaving Knuckles, she was getting away. And by now the cell tower logs are coming back. They can now see that Hollie's phone hasn't really been used. I think it was turned off at about 10 AM on the Sunday morning. And just before that, at 5 minutes to 10, Hollie had sent a message to her sister that simply read, "I'll message in a bit." And at this point, social media was still silent. Hollie hadn't been using her phone, she hadn't been using social media, but there was one more avenue that the police could go down. Obviously, if Hollie's on the run, she's going to need money. And chances are she wouldn't have had that much cash, so at some point she's going to have to use a bank, either to pay for something on a phone or on a card, or she's going to have to withdraw money. So the police went straight to the bank, they asked to look into the account and see if the card had been used. And it came back saying that the card had been used twice in 2 different supermarkets, 1 each. And that was on the day after she disappeared. So now there's hope. So police quickly go straight down to them supermarkets and ask for the CCTV. Obviously at this point they're really hoping they're going to have seen footage of Hollie buying things or withdrawing cash or something. And if not, maybe the person that knows where Hollie is a person using the card. Person on the CCTV using Hollie's cards was Chris. At both locations, it was Chris that was buying stuff on Hollie's card. Now, obviously that's suspicious straight away. But it's even more suspicious because he told the police that Hollie had took her cards with her. And if them 2 things aren't suspicious enough, what he was buying is definitely suspicious. Just 27 hours after Hollie had last been seen or heard from, Chris was out using her card to buy refuse sacks, bin liners basically, and bleach. Later on the same day, in the other supermarket, he was buying a mop and bucket. So he's obviously trying to clean something. And yeah, I know it could be innocent. Everybody buys bleach, everyone buys bin liners, everybody has to buy a mop and bucket every now and again. So it could be quite innocent. And another thing I thought of is maybe that now that Hollie's left, he's trying to clean the house, he's trying to occupy himself, keep him busy. There is lots of possible explanations to why this is an innocent thing to do. However, a plausible explanation doesn't make something not suspicious. And by the way, if you are thinking that, you also have to remember that not only had he split up with Hollie and he was still using a card, he'd also told the police that she'd got her cards. So the all-round thing just adds up to make something suspicious. The police by now have already turned to the media and asked them to appeal for Hollie. And I think not only was that to ramp up the investigation, but I think they knew that Chris had done something and they wanted to apply extra pressure onto him. And let's not forget, at this time he's also appealing on social media for help looking for her and stuff. He's really looking like the caring guy that's just been dumped with his kids. Then somebody at the local school came forward and said that Chris had been seen putting clothes, sacks of clothes, into one of them charity drop-off collection points. You know, the big metal bins? And that were located inside the school. So, obviously, again, you can still say, well, if he's clearing out the house, maybe he's getting rid of the kids' clothes that don't fit anymore. But it's still, on top of everything the police already know, it's just extra suspicious. And also what you've got to remember is he's told everybody that Hollie's took her clothes with her, or at least some of them. So now if he's throwing away clothes, are they potentially the clothes that he wants people to think she's took? Let's just take a quick second to recap. So far we're expected to believe that Hollie and Chris argued on the Saturday, they argued on the Sunday, and then on the Sunday she decided to leave, she'd had enough, and she left the kids behind. Since leaving, she hasn't contacted her family at all, despite her being very close to her family. Her phone hasn't been on, and she hasn't been on social media, and that's massively out of character. Then on the day after she's disappeared, Chris has used her bank card to buy cleaning products from 2 different supermarkets. And then a witness comes forward to say that it could have potentially been getting rid of some of her clothes. So there's now quite a lot of evidence building up that suggests Chris isn't being as innocent as he's saying he is. And individually, they are all just coincidental, and it doesn't make that much difference. But when pieced together, it paints a really dark picture. And obviously the police noticed this like a flashing beacon. They could see that there was something not right about Chris. So 2 days after Hollie's disappearance, the police upped the team from 25 to 60 officers. And while they did that, they asked Chris to come to a police station for a second statement. When Chris arrived at the police station, he was led into an interview room, and this happened.
Mr. Kerrell. Yeah, Mr. Kerrell, I'm DC 1077 Market. I'm arresting you for the murder of Hollie Kerrell. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention one question, something which you may require in court.
It's not the best audio, so for anyone on the podcast that didn't quite hear that, the police entered the interview room and pretty much straight away informed Chris that he was under arrest for the murder of Hollie Kerrell. But I also noticed that they didn't say suspicion of murder. They actually said that he's under arrest for murder and then read him his rights. At this point, Chris says he doesn't understand, and the police now have to make sure that he understands his rights, because you have to understand, it's the entire point of reading them. So they asked, do you understand your rights? And he says, I understand that bit, yeah, but that's about it. I don't understand why or what or... And needless to say, Chris continued to protest his innocence. So now it's quite obvious the police firmly believe that Chris killed Hollie, because if not, they wouldn't have arrested him. If they were just thought it but weren't quite sure, they wouldn't have arrested him. And that comes into fruition even more in a minute when I talk about how long you can be held in custody for. Either which way, Chris was taken off to be interviewed by a specialist officer with a solicitor present. Throughout the entire interview, Chris protested his innocence, and he was calm and relaxed throughout the entire thing. But Chris really weren't in a good position. You see, Chris already had a history of sexual offences. He'd also had offences for theft and for fraud. But most importantly, there was also an offence from a domestic abuse from a previous partner. Police informed Chris that, look, we know that Hollie's tried to leave you on several occasions, but you won't let her. Or at least that's what her friends have said. And he says, yeah, that's true. But then he pointed out that he was living at his mum's house. He had left her. While the calm, relaxed, arrogant Chris has been interviewed, I'm not quite sure what he knew that they knew. But he probably realised that they didn't have any solid evidence. And they didn't have any solid evidence. Everything they knew were pretty much speculation. They didn't know anything about what had happened, where it had happened, where Hollie was. They didn't have any information. So without the confession, there was nothing they could do. However, unbeknown to Chris, while this interview was being conducted, the police were at his house, or shall I say Hollie's house, their marital house, and they were searching it. They were looking for evidence. And in the kitchen bin, they found a hammer. Now, again, for you guys on the podcast, you probably can't see this hammer, but I am currently showing a picture of the actual hammer. And this hammer looks perfectly fine. It's obviously been used a bit, but there's nothing to suggest that it needs throwing away. It's a decent hammer. So the fact that it's in the bin is quite suspicious. They also discovered Hollie's purse and the bank cards, as long as some other items, but I'm not quite sure if they found a phone or not. Either which way, that were quite damning as well, because he told police that she took them with her. So the hammer was sent off for analysis, and meanwhile the police kept searching. However, other than that, they couldn't really find any other signs of murder. There were no blood or anything in the house to suggest that something had happened. And that were quite a worry to the police, because they were quite counting on the fact that they were going to turn up and find the evidence they needed to charge Chris. But there was nothing there. And that's a bigger problem than it sounds. Because when the police arrest you, they've only got 24 hours to charge you. And they can't charge you without any evidence. Luckily for the police, this was a murder investigation. So they can then apply for the amount of time they can hold you to be up to 96 hours. But either which way, time is now ticking. They've only got 96 hours to find this evidence, and it isn't where they expected it to be. And yeah, alright, the hammer might come back with something, but it still might not be enough evidence, even if it does come back in time saying that that hammer has hit somebody on the head. And meanwhile, obviously, Chris is still sat there being cocky and arrogant and not pleading guilty to anything. And as I said before, the police are obviously adamant that Chris had done it. He'd done something. It was his fault that she disappeared and couldn't be found. So they went back to tracing the steps. But this time they weren't tracing Hollie's steps. They were tracing Chris's. As I mentioned before, they were using the cell towers to find out where Chris's phone had been at any point throughout the 24 hours or 48 hours surrounding Hollie's disappearance. And they went a step further than that. They were also checking for Wi-Fi. Now, just like a cell tower, Wi-Fi logs connectivity. So if when you walk into your house, there will be a log on your router saying that the address of your phone did connect to that router at what time. So the police were adamant they needed to check Hollie's Wi-Fi router and Chris's mum's Wi-Fi router. And they'd expect that Chris would be there and that it'd be there, but now they'd be able to get a good picture of what time he was at either location. There was also another trick up their sleeve: ANPR systems. Now, ANPR systems stand for Automatic Number Plate Recognition. And I don't know about other countries, but in England they are everywhere. Seriously, you don't really find them on housing estates and stuff, but any main roads got ANPR systems. You can't go too far without being seen by one. So they ran his number plate to find out where he'd been at what time, or at least where his car had been. But again, this didn't really turn up much. It'd been at his house, or his mum's house should I say, it'd been at the marital home, it'd been to the supermarkets, but he'd not been anywhere that they didn't expect. Everything kind of fit into what they already knew, even though that they now had a better understanding of the times. However, this is where it all changes. A member of the public came forward as a witness. She'd seen Chris in an isolated location, and this is what she said in a statement.
I could see a person striding up the boundary side of the meadow. He was doing big strides, he was looking down and looking purposeful. I said, "What are you up to?" as I glanced towards the fence. He said something like the dog had died, or he had buried the dog. Chris seemed normal, he was quite nice. He didn't seem agitated.
Obviously, the police are immediately interested in this piece of land. So they've run some checks, and it comes back saying that this land is owned by Chris's family. It's a part of the farm. And furthermore to that, this specific part of the land is secluded. There is no nearby houses. So it goes without saying, the police immediately rallied up a search team and went straight down to that field. Soon as they entered the field, they saw some fairly fresh vehicle marks. There were big vehicle marks, something off like a tractor. Police then found the area and they started to slowly dig. They were looking for Hollie's body, or a dog's body, or anything that Chris could have buried. He definitely buried something, and they wanted to find out what. After hours of slowly and carefully digging, trying their best not to damage any potential forensic evidence, they eventually covered something that was black. It was black sheeting. It weren't quite a black sack, it was more like black sheeting. It weren't immediately obvious what was inside the sack, so the police kept digging slowly and carefully, trying to exhume whatever this sack was. And it still seemed just like a bag of stuff, a sack of something. And eventually they got to a point where they saw what they believed was a human knee. When the entire package had finally been exhumed, they took it off to be examined by a pathologist. Despite not having it confirmed officially, Detective Anthony Griffiths decided he couldn't keep Hollie's mum waiting. Officers went to Hollie's mum's house and informed her that a body had been found on Chris's family's farmland, and they believed that it was Hollie's body. The following morning, the police received the Home Office's pathology report. The report confirmed the body that had been found was indeed Hollie. When the pathologist received the package, they carefully opened it, and the first thing that they noticed was a Thomas the Tank Engine child's bedding. After removing the bedding, the pathologist found that Hollie's body had been tied together, bound in the fetal position with ratchet straps. They also confirmed that Hollie had been hit on the back of the head. There were fractures to the back of the skull. However, there was also marks around the neck area which were consistent with strangulation. Police now had all the evidence they needed. They now vaguely pieced together what had happened, when it had happened, and what Chris had done after. They even had a witness saying that they saw Chris burying something in the area that Hollie's body had been buried. Although be it that he said that he was burying a dog, it still didn't matter. It still put him in the right place at the right time, burying something. However, obviously they want Chris to plead guilty, because if not, they still have to go through all the heartache, they still have to drag Hollie's family through court and things like that. They really needed a guilty plea. So the police went straight back to Chris and interviewed him again. They told Chris that they'd found Hollie. They told him they knew everything. They listed the evidence. They showed him pictures of Hollie. They showed him pictures of the bedding. They intentionally went through every little step, trying to recall every single memory and every single thought about that moment and about that day to really prey on Chris's conscience. They really wanted to drive home what he'd done, hoping that this would lead to a confession. I did also read that police had found searches on Chris's phone relating to can bleach remove bloodstains. However, I'm not quite sure at what point they found that search. Throughout his entire interview that police were giving him all this information, Chris very arrogantly sat back, cross-armed, and very calm and carefully just continued to say no comment. So, with Chris not giving forward any new information and still not pleading guilty, they left it. They sent him back to his cell in hopes that overnight all the thoughts were going to be running through his head, his conscience were going to get deeper, and eventually plead guilty. The next morning, 5 days after Hollie's disappearance and 3 days of being in police custody, Chris Kerrell asked to speak to the police officers. They took him back into another interview room, and that's when he confessed. He gave the police a full account of what happened. According to Chris, he went back to the house that day as he did every day to see the children. He'd done this every day since they broke up. However, another argument broke out, and as Hollie had turned round to make Chris a drink, he looked to his side and there was a hammer on the kitchen side. So he grabbed the hammer and he hit Hollie on the back of the head. It was all in a moment's rage, and when Hollie fell to the floor, he got on top of her and strangled her for 10 minutes until she died. He said, "I can't tell you if I hit her with the hammer again. I can't remember. A lot of it is blank." The police asked him where the kids were at this time, and he replied saying they were outside playing. A few seconds of silence passed, and then he said,
"Okay, so can we not bring the kids into this? I'll try and investigate, because it's nothing to do with them. They were there, they didn't see it, they didn't witness anything. Yeah, I just need to know where they were." They were out, they're not that sick. They weren't in there looking when I was doing it. Yeah.
So Chris Kerrell has now painted this picture that it was a heat of the moment thing. Do they call it passion or something? The moment of murder. He just saw red and he hit her. It weren't planned, it weren't premeditated. However, thanks to Hollie's messages, police knew this weren't true. Police knew the hammer was not on the kitchen side. As I mentioned earlier, the day that Chris came round, Hollie was talking to her sister via text message. The last part of that conversation reads like this. "He's just been in the shed and got a hammer." To this, Hollie's sister replied, "Ring the police. Now!" And that's when Hollie sent back the final message, "I'll message in a bit." So police know that Chris didn't find the hammer on the kitchen side. Police know that he weren't angry and just picked it up out of happenstance. And it's also likely that after he'd got the hammer out of the shed, he had to walk back past the kids that were playing outside. Obviously, I don't know if the kids were on the front or not, but they're only young, so I assume they was on the back of the house. In which case, that he definitely will have had to walk back past them with the hammer, which he then killed their mother with. That sounds very premeditated to me. And I suppose you could say, well, do you know it's not premeditated because he only decided a couple of minutes before, but it certainly weren't in the heat of the moment. He, 1, went to the shed, he, 2, got the hammer after finding it, and 3, then walked back to the house. That isn't a spur of a moment in the moment thing, at all. After the murder, he bound Hollie into the fetal position. He wrapped her body in the kids' bedsheets, and then stopped to drink Hollie's cup of tea that she was drinking before Chris arrived. After drinking the tea, he then cleaned up all the blood, and any other potential evidence or visual sightings that something had happened. He then put Hollie's body into the boot of the car and then came back in to give the kids lunch. A few hours after, with Hollie's body in the boot, he put the kids into the car and drove to his mum's farm, which was 6-9 miles away. Once at the farm, he left the kids with his mum and went back outside. This is when he'd got some black silage wrapping from the farm and wrapped Hollie up. He then put her into the bucket of the tractor and drove about a mile down the field to the location where he buried Hollie in a shallow grave. He then went back to the farm, collected the children, and went back to their marital home to spend the night with the children. On Friday the 27th of April 2018, Chris Kerrell was charged with Hollie Kerrell's murder. During Chris and Hollie's relationship and marriage, there'd never been a report of coercive control or domestic abuse. Never once was anything reported to the police. On the run-up to his trial, Chris continued and maintained his plea that it was only manslaughter. He'd lost control momentarily and it was completely spontaneous. It wasn't premeditated. On the day of the trial, 22nd of October 2018, he unexpectedly turned up to court and pled guilty for murder. In response, the judge told him he had to go and wait for sentencing, and he also said that Chris should expect a life in prison. On Friday the 2nd of November 2018, a judge gave Chris the minimum sentence possible. That was 15 years. The police officer leading the investigation, Detective Anthony Griffiths, was at the sentencing, and he says he could see a smile on Chris's face. It really looked like Chris was smirking, saying, "Yeah, I've really got away with this. I've got my lightest sentence possible." However, the judge did continue. He added another 2 years for each aggregating factor. There was 2 years added for any suffering that Hollie endured before her death. 2 more years were added for murdering Hollie in her own home. 2 more years for murdering Hollie while the children was in her care. Another 2 years for concealing her body. And a final 2 years for lying to her family and friends, informing them that she was still alive. At this point, Chris was no longer smiling. But he still didn't look sad. It was still the emotionless arrogance that he was, just standing there. Not sorry, not remorseful, just emotionless. The total sentence that Chris Kerrell was given was 25 years. He did appeal this sentence, but his appeal was denied. Still, to this day, he hasn't bothered to give an explanation of what he did. And I don't think an explanation is needed or even possible. I personally think he was just a selfish, possessive, controlling man that couldn't handle the fact that he didn't own Hollie. And she weren't going to bow down and let him control her life. But we need to discuss this. We need to go into this a bit more. Because I've been looking at the stats on it. And this is a big problem. I imagine it's a big problem around the world. But even more so in this country. Because Hollie didn't do anything wrong. Hollie wasn't the problem. Hollie didn't act in any way other than normal people do. The problem of this entire story, the only reason that Hollie is no longer with her family and her children, is because of Chris. He was the problem. And he is a problem. And before I go any further, I do want to say I'm not one of these that's going to stand here and say we need to protect women. Because in my eyes, this is not about women. This is about domestic abuse. And women are, in the vast majority, the victims of this. But 20% of domestic homicides are men. So it's for men too. And I don't want... The reason that's important for me to say is because we should be protecting everybody and not just women. And of course, because women count for 80% of the victims, they do take a higher precedent. But I can't do this next talk without saying that. And you might think, oh, we know, stop going on about it. No, it needs to be gone on about. Did you know in England and Wales, there is at least two women killed by their partner each week? Each week, at least 2 women will be killed by their partner. That's not okay. That's not alright. And that needs stopping. Dr. Monckton Smith, who featured quite heavily in a documentary about this case, she's got the 8 stages. And basically, I'm going to read it, these are, and I did get this from the documentary. I didn't know about these 8 stages until I read it, and the 8 stages do coincide perfectly with this story. This is how, these 8 stages are basically how you can spot a domestic homicide and how you can prevent it from happening. So the first sign or the first stage is history. If somebody has got a history of stalking or a history of coercive control or domestic abuse, that is the first stage. And it's more obvious that it'll happen again in the future, but it's not always obvious for a new partner to know that somebody has that history. The second stage is they'll want commitment very quickly. They'll want the relationship solidifying. And I suppose that makes sense. They want to show that you're not going to leave. They want that visual and that solid sign that you're theirs, really. And if you look back at Hollie and Chris's story right at the beginning, I did mention that they'd got married after 3 years, and then at the end of their 8-year-long relationship, because they'd been married for 5 years, they'd already had 3 kids. So alright, that's not out of the ordinary, and I'm not saying if you propose to someone too soon, you are domestically abusive. But that sign is there in their relationship. The third step and stage and sign is coercive control and sometimes violence. The fourth stage on the way to domestic homicide is their control. Their ownership comes under threat. So obviously, Chris was saying, oh, well, if you leave me, I'll commit suicide in front of the kids. And this rings really true, because I know a lot of people, even as a teenager, where people used to say, oh, he said that he can't be without me, he'll commit suicide if I leave. That's a horrible thing to say to somebody. If you really love somebody, you really shouldn't be telling them that he'll commit suicide if they leave. That's not showing somebody how much you love them. So that's the second stage. The signs that they're losing control. The fifth stage is when they've already started to lose control. At this point, they're going to try and do everything they can to regain that control. They're going to cry, they're going to beg, they're going to tell you that they can change. And again, that's another line from the book that we've all heard so many times of I'll change. And some people do. They can learn to handle the emotions they have and things. But the reality is, without help, the chances are they're not going to change. And I don't mean help from you being a supportive partner. I mean actual professional help, which is available, especially in the UK. And again, threatening to kill themselves or do something extreme is part of number 5. The 6th stage is quite a critical stage. At this point, they've pretty much lost control, or they think they've lost control. So they either decide to move on, or they decide to do something to get that control back. 7 is when they start plotting and planning what they're going to do. Then 8 is the homicide itself. And I don't know if I accredited it to Dr. Monckton. I will put some links in the description if I can find any to anything that she's wrote officially. But it's quite important that I put that out there, because like Dr. Monckton said, and like they're on the documentary, of if we could all see these signs, maybe we could protect ourselves better. Maybe we could protect somebody else better. And like I said, if you watch this video back, you'll see that all the 8 stages were there. Quite textbook-like. He'd had a report of domestic abuse against him. And I do want to add as well, I forgot it, that does include ex-stalker as well. If somebody's been a stalker, that does also qualify. They'd got married really quickly and had kids. He'd threatened to kill himself if Hollie had ever left. He was smashing her phone up, breaking her car keys. So all the signs really were there. And I want to say, if you are in a similar situation, there is help out there for you. There is something that can be done. In the UK, there's not much that can be done if you're not willing to. For example, if I know someone that's in a domestically abusive relationship, I can't go to the police. And I would say to you, if you know someone that's in a domestically abusive relationship, go to the police. The police can't do anything, but at least ask them to put down on record that you've reported it. And like I say, if you are in this situation, I know you want to believe that person's going to change. And if you've got kids, you're probably saying, as long as it doesn't hurt the kids are fine. I can take it, I can cope. You're worth more than that. Have more respect for yourself. Because the reality is, one, you shouldn't be suffering, and two, if he said he's going to change, especially if it's not the first time he's saying he's going to change, the chances are he won't. And if you're scared of it, he's going to do something, when you leave, go to the police and say, look, this is the relationship I've been in, this is why I'm leaving him, and I'm really scared that something might happen, if not to me, to himself. That is okay to do. Now, I'm going to bang a load of links in the description for helpful services. That also includes if you are a person, a man or a woman, and you think you're coercively controlling your partner, if you think you're abusive to your partner, then please do look at the links as well, because there is a link in there for you. There is help out there for you. You're not just a bad person. There is help. You can go to these services and they'll teach you what your behaviours are, where they come from, how to handle them, how to handle the thoughts or whatever it is. I don't know, I'm not a professional. But if you are one of these people that are the perpetrators, just do something about it. There is help. You don't have to carry on. And I'm sure that the majority of the perpetrators can sit back and think, do you know what? I don't like being like this. I'm just insecure. I mean, you can do something. We all have insecurities. I've rambled far too much off my notes, so I can't quite remember which bits I've said and which bits I haven't. The links in the description. Obviously, I'm only from the UK, so I don't know much about other countries. I will try and find links for... I'll look at where my subscribers are from and try and pick for top 2 or 3 countries and try and get links for them other countries. But if you're not in a country mentioned, or if the links don't seem helpful to you, then please tell someone. Make sure your family and friends know the situation you're in. Please tell a doctor. Please tell the flipping pharmacist or the school teacher. It doesn't matter who you tell. Just tell somebody. Help can be done. You are worth more. And it is a dangerous situation. Even if the control's only psychological, even if the damage is only psychological, it's still not fair for you to be in that situation. That's the end of this video. That's as much content as I've got for you. I send my love to Hollie's family. I can't even imagine the amount of pain. As a father of children, I can't imagine the amount of pain that they've been through. And my biggest reason for covering this story is because it's a story that everybody should know. Especially the message at the end of this is happening far too often, far too much to far too many people. So please, if you know somebody that's in this situation, or if you're in this situation yourself, either as a victim or a perpetrator, please do something about it. Do not be another statistic on the domestic homicide list. Please don't let that happen. Next week.